One of the most fundamental questions that researchers are often confronted with is, why do we undertake sampling in research? If you want to carry out a study, say on causes of poverty or living conditions in a given area, and the area, say, has a population of 1 million or half a million or even 1,000, the question is, why must we undertake sampling? Why do we go for a percentage of that population that we call sampling instead of involving the entire population in our study? There are four simple reasons as to why we undertake sampling. This is what I want us to take some time and discuss. One of the reasons is the most obvious, which is to save time. We know if, say, you have a population of 10,000 and you have to give each of those elements in the population, each individual within the population, say a questionnaire, or you have to conduct an interview with each and every one of them, it will take absolutely a lot of time to cover all the people within that population. That is why we sometimes prefer to engage a small percentage of that larger population for purposes of our study. Therefore, one of the reasons why we undertake sampling is to save time. We will use considerable amount of time to engage, say, the entire population, and less time when we choose to gauge or to engage just a small percentage of that population. For example, engaging a population which is 10,000 will take more time than engaging, say, 1% of that 10,000, which is approximately 100 individuals. So we save a lot of time when we just engage a small proportion of that larger population. That is important. But the other reason why we undertake sampling is to save resources. To save resources. We need resources to undertake a study. We need money. We need other items such as cameras. In some sophisticated studies, we might require even motor vehicles, motorcycles, among others. Again, a study might also require the researcher, the lead researcher, the research assistants, and even enumerators. Each of these individuals might be catered for in terms of their lunch, in terms of their accommodation, in terms of their transport, and also in terms of the professional fee that is given to them. So if you are to engage a larger population for the study, it might require you to engage a larger so many individuals as research assistants and enumerators. Therefore, you have to take care of them financially in all matters. Again, if you are to photocopy or prepare research instruments such as questionnaires, if it is a quantitative study, Again, you need to prepare so many copies of questionnaires, each of which might cost approximately, say, 50 or 100 Kenya shillings, depending on the length of the questionnaire. That is, you have to spend considerable amount of money, considerable amount of resources to cover a larger population. To save resources, therefore, researchers are advised to just engage a small proportion within the larger population for purposes of the study. And that is why, again, we carry out sampling. It's also important for us to observe that the other reason why sampling becomes important is also to reduce workload. Workload in what sense? The number of days that we have to spend in the field, the number of days or hours that we have to spend doing coding, analyzing, entering data and analyzing, and even writing a research report. Quite amount of work is involved. So if we engage a larger population, there's a possibility that we are going to engage and to utilize even more work. And by utilizing more work, it would mean we spend more hours doing the work, and that is a huge workload. It's not such an easy task. So to have a reasonable workload and still maintain the integrity of the study, we undertake sampling so that instead of engaging, say, 10,000 people that reside in a given area, we engage, say, 2 or 300. The amount of time that we require to cover 300 is quite less compared to the entire population of 1,000. Again, the amount of time that we shall require to code questionnaires from 300 individuals is much less compared to what we require to code 10,000. Further, the amount of time that is required to analyze and compile a report of information obtained from 10,000 individuals is much less compared to what we shall utilize to cover, say, 300. So by sampling, we are in a considerable manner reducing the amount of time, the amount of manpower, the amount of effort that we put in the research. So that is also another important reason why we engage in sampling. Again, the other reason why we do sampling is what we call generalization. By generalization simply means obtaining data from a select group, then using that data to draw conclusions about the larger group. For example, take the case of doctors when they advise a patient to go for a laboratory test in order for them to understand what exactly is the problem that the patient is suffering from. Upon reaching the laboratory, a laboratory technician only takes a small sample of one's blood. They don't draw the entire blood from the human body. They only take a small sample of the blood and then they test it. Once they test it and they find that an individual, say, is suffering from malaria, from typhoid, or any other thing, then they conclude that indeed the entire body or the entire individual or the individual as a whole is presenting a malarian case. So the doctor doesn't have to insist on the entire blood from the individual being drawn, and then lab test is undertaken. That's the same thing that we do with studies. We can study a given proportion of a larger population, and then the findings that we find with that small population, we then conclude that that is a characteristic of the entire population. That is what we mean by generalization. So, if it is possible to understand what affects the entire population by focusing on a small proportion of that population, then it is meaningless to engage all the individuals in a given population, because in doing so, you would still arrive at the same result. Thank you. Those are some of the reasons as to why we undertake sampling in research.